every successful person got there by going through tough times. Success is a hard-ass teacher who likes to knock you around along that journey. You know, it takes real guts to not give up and keep going. We'll hear stories about failures and how these leaders flip the script to create success. I'm John Schultz. Join me and let's discover how success is never really overnight. So, welcome to the John Schultz podcast. We have an amazing guest today. Very excited, as I always am. I just love learning from new people and experiences, and that's why I love this podcast. But her name is Samara Cohen. She is the Chief Investment Officer of ETF and Index Investments at BlackRock. Crazy to say there's $10 trillion of assets BlackRock has, which is tremendous. But she leads a team responsible for over 6.6 trillion of them. Index investments, including portfolio management, trading, product development. That seems like a lot of responsibility. It's a crazy number. What I love, I'm going to say next is, you've had a nearly 30-year career at BlackRock. When I was first doing this podcast, it was supposed to be the 30-year overnight success. I changed it to the myth of overnight success, but as we all know, it takes a long time to do what we do. You have a very unique background blending finance, economics, and theater. I'm from a theater family, so I just love the theater thing. My daughter's actually trying to do that for a living, very hard, but she keeps trying. And you sit on the Global Market Executive Committee, which, sort of gives you a front row to market trends and investor needs. And you've been an unbelievable driving force behind BlackRock's ETF innovation, sustainable investing solutions, improving market structure, and transparency, which obviously I know is very important to you. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. That was quite a wind-up. I hope I deliver.
I am sure you will. You've done it for 30 years, so why not now?
I got to say, I love the myth of overnight success. My career is definitely a story of careers being marathons and not sprints.
There you go, right? And, what I also love about every guest is the most exciting things that they talk about when they talk to me are what went wrong and how they got out of it, or what wasn't going exactly the right way and how they dealt with it. And that was like their most proud moments. But what we do, we start way back. So my first question to you would be, how would your parents describe you?
My parents would say that I am driven, passionate, funny, and a nonstop worrier, I think. All of those things at the same time.
Wow. So I think we have a little bit of the worrier in my family too. And it's funny when I try to change the meaning of that word, because worry just has a sort of bad connotation to it, where it's more like alert, right? Like I'm always alert for what's moving and changing. And I think as an entrepreneur or running anything, you have to be that, right? So knowing that, you grow up with a certain set of people around you, you get those traits usually from our families. How would you say your father's career influenced you? Because I know what my father did to influence me. How did he have an impact on you?
Well, both of my parents' trajectories definitely influenced me, as did their relationship, meaning, so my father was a pediatric neurosurgeon, so literally a brain surgeon who saved children's lives. He was a rock star in the field of pediatric neurosurgery. And I grew up, I remember, especially for some reason, I have such a vivid memory. We're New Yorkers. I have a vivid memory of going to Yankee games with him and having people stop him at the game and recognize him and say, "You're Dr. Fred Epstein. You saved, so-and-so, my neighbor's, daughter." And my father passed away, sadly, of melanoma 17 years ago. I was pregnant with my son, Fred, who's named after him. But to this day, sometimes people will find me on Facebook or Instagram and just say, your father saved my life when I was, 4 or 5 years old or whatever. So my father set a very high bar for having impact in the world. But, to the point you made, John, about people always learning from their mistakes, one of the things he spoke about often, in addition to speaking about his field of expertise, which was brain surgery, he also talked about learning disabilities and the fact that he had a really hard time in school and learning how to read when he was a child, and that first, teachers, great teachers and not so great teachers, made all the difference in his life. And second, when it came to his career in neurosurgery, his defining moments came from not being scared of being laughed at or making mistakes. And he believed that children should be treated differently than adults when it came to operating on brain or spinal cord tumors, because it didn't mean as much to a kid to just prolong their life by a few years. He wanted the kid to be mobile and to have long lives. And so he wanted to apply very different techniques. And he was really, people said it'll never work. He was made fun of, and he tried lots of different things. And he has a whole, he had a whole speech on experiments that he did not, on animals, not on people. But ultimately, he came up with pioneering the use of lasers in treating brainstem and spinal cord tumors that had previously been considered inoperable. So there are literally thousands and thousands of people who lived and walked because of these techniques. But he attributed his resilience in developing these techniques to being resilient, being able to recover from getting things wrong, and believing that he could do it. So that set a lot of both a high standard in making an impact on the world, but also the importance of resilience and muscling through your mistakes.
Plus, it makes you proud, right? Because like when you're seeing other people come up to, I know when people come up to my family or my father, or my mother unfortunately has passed too, but I feel it inside me. It's funny, my wife's father was a sort of famous pediatrician in Philadelphia. So I got the same thing when we were at restaurants. People would come up, they loved him so much, and he took such good care of his patients, and it felt good to see how much he was loved and respected. How about your mom? Did you get a different sort of feel from her experience?
Yeah. So look, with my mom, I am the oldest of 5 kids, and my parents had children basically throughout 18 years. So I'm the oldest. My youngest brother, Ben, is 18 years younger than me.
Wow.
My mom, they had 5 kids. I think part of what helped my father in his field, which was taking care of kids who were very sick, was kind of coming home to a household of, lots of healthy kids. And so we had a lot of kids. And so, but he had tremendously demanding hours. And so my mother was the CEO of our house. And I think that meant a couple of things to me. First, looking back on it, I think she really made huge efforts to preserve the time that I had with my dad because he was so busy. So she kind of was always the bad guy, so that he got to come in and be the hero because he just never had as much time with us. And so looking back on it, I realized, and I've kind of apologized to her for the dynamic, because now that I'm also the mother of a teen girl, I said to her, I'm sorry for all the being a teen girl, basically, growing up and giving you a hard time. Because I realize now that I'm a parent, not only were you you were the bad guy for 2 people. And so that's something that I realize now. The other thing is that as supportive and passionate as my mother was in supporting what my father did, she really wanted me to have whatever job I wanted and the biggest job I wanted. And she was very, very, she was, I remember she used to send me clippings of the wedding section in the New York Times. Like some people's mothers would send them this, like, you should be getting married. She was sending me it and circling, things saying, these women aren't getting married until their 30s. You've got time, go out there, go to business school, throw yourself into your job. And so she definitely really championed me having whatever job I want. Now, I will say my father, kind of set a high standard. I did at one point, I remember before, maybe when I was in business school, have a little bit of a crisis of confidence in saying, like, how do I want to make as big a positive impact on the world as you have, and you've been saving children's lives. So is it okay for me to want to be in markets or investments? Is that a cop out? And he was awesome about it. They both were. He said, you need to find the thing that gets that you can be the most successful about, that you're passionate about, and you can make a difference doing anything in the world, on top of which you can, if you're financially able, support a lot of good causes and make just as big a difference, in the world as I did. So that was the message they both gave me.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like, measuring up. It's not an easy
Totally.
thing to have to deal with. And even going into what your parents are is not always an easy thing to deal with, no matter how good you get, right? It's like that imposter syndrome comes and creeps in from all of us for everything that we do. But I love it. I feel like I grew up in the same type of atmosphere. My mom, I mean, she was my rock. So I always felt like she's the one tapping me on my shoulder whenever I feel like, oh my God, can I do this or can I not do this? To this day, even
I love
with her
that.
not being here. So I think that's exciting. All right. So obviously, when you're younger, you get hobbies, things that you are passionate about. Let's talk about theater. Because I feel theater and everything about it is something that will help people's business careers, because everything's about presenting, communicating, learning how to listen, knowing when to step in and step out. I know we have lines, but you still got to deliver them properly. What got you into theater? And how did that help you as a younger person, right? It's almost like a team sport, because both my daughters were in it as well.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. Theater was my version of learning who I was as part of a team, and importantly, as a leader of a team. And I was passionate about it. It was way more than a hobby for me. I went to college believing that A, I was going to major in theater, and B, after college, I wanted to, change the world through the medium of theater. And what that meant to me back then was I felt that, and I wasn't interested in film, or I was really interested in live theater and kind of the impact storytelling could have on a community. I was never really an actor, although you make great points. Like, no matter what you're doing in theater as a theater major, you have to take acting classes and you have to learn how to improv and how to play off other people and just how to, keep from being blown off the stage, in my case, because I was never like a naturally gifted actor. But what I was really passionate about was the backstage stuff, was the production. The more complicated, the better. I did stage management, directing, lighting design, costume design, and I really loved all of those things, both the energy of how you put together a show, and then the creativity of kind of the orchestral piece of bringing all the different parts together and what would ultimately be an experience for an audience. And I think through that, I learned how to work hard. And I always tell people, I think college is a lot about like finding your work ethic, and how you work and what you do matters less. Like when I look at people's resumes coming out of college, I want to see that they've shown really hard work at anything. So I had to work really hard, and then I had opportunities to lead, and I learned in those opportunities, both positively and negatively, what worked and different. I remember once, probably my first experience with being told I was a micromanager when I was directing. You do in the couple of days before you opened, you'd have copious notes for the actors, and a director. The biggest thing that you have to do is slowly like understand that the actors are going to do that show without you. And there's a big kind of ceremonial moment the night before a show opens where the director kind of hands their book over to the stage manager, who from that moment on kind of calls the show. And it was really hard for me in those like first moments when I was in charge of everything to be able to step away from the minutia and trust that the team had it. And at that point, it was their job to run with.
I'm so glad you pointed out the behind the stage things, because no matter what we're doing and what industry or profession, all the components of running anything comes together, right? In theater, entertainment, it all has the same components as finance and business. So my question to you, knowing that it's still such an opposite thing, like finance and theater, how did you get any interest in the finance side?
Sure. So, um, yes, it is an opposite thing, but I will tell you exactly what happened. So I actually, while I worked for BlackRock, 30 years ago, it was my first job out of college. I actually was gone for 18 years before I came back to BlackRock. So after 4 years of BlackRock, I decided to go to business school. And I decided to go to business school for two reasons. Number one, because I was a theater major and I still I really didn't know what I was doing when I sent my resume out. So I thought maybe I could be a little bit more thoughtful around my job search. And I was really interested in just seeing what was out there. And so I wanted to go to a business school that had students from around the world and all different types of industries. And I liked school. And so I just liked the idea of having a graduate degree. And so I went to business school. And then I thought perhaps I could better marry my theater and finance interests in a way that used both. And so I spent a lot of my first year at business school interviewing with big theater companies to be kind of in administrative roles. And I had a realization, which was that I did not want to be the non-creative person in a creative field. I was not interested in arts administration. And sometimes it's just as important to uncover the thing that you don't want to do as it is like the thing that you do want to do. And so that happened. And then Goldman Sachs was actually trying to get more women to apply to their markets business, the sales and trading business, which is the institutional trading floor. And they went through the resume, the Harvard Business School resume book, and actually reached out to me because they saw BlackRock on my resume. And they said, how come you're not applying to, our securities division, our sales and trading division? And honestly, the whole idea of that was very intimidating to me, but they invited me to come and visit the trading floor. And this is where the theater thing comes back, John, because a trading floor, especially at that time, there are definitely many more men than women. And normally that might have, just intimidated me, or it would have been harder for me to see myself on it. But just the energy, the atmosphere, the way people were working with each other, it felt very much like Tech Week of a show. And so I thought I can do that. I can be in that environment and I would really enjoy it. And so that piece of myself, it was the how I worked and how I worked best and what sort of energy I liked to be around, directly led to my feeling confident, kind of throwing my hat in the ring for a summer associate job at Goldman Sachs.
So you went to Goldman, and how many years were you there?
16. I was there for 16 years.
That's incredible. What would you say, knowing that you felt comfortable in that role, right? We're good at what we practice at. We have innate talents that we're gifted, right? We don't know where they come from, but they're there. What were the challenges you had being at a firm like that? I mean, high paced, pressure. From what I hear, very, very, strong work ethic, and almost as if you don't have your young life except at work. What were the challenges you had with that?
Well, look, all of those things are true. And I get these days, I have a group of friends. We were just talking the other day about how we hate the term work-life balance, which women get asked about way more than men. Which is interesting because in my experience, both men and women have the same kind of desires to live a full, exciting, happy life, whatever that looks like to them. But I look back on those times and yes, I spent a lot of time working, but I'm proud of it and I enjoyed it. And, for what it's worth, I did meet my husband, Adam, at Goldman. We weren't in the same business, but we met. We were on different floors, but we did meet at Goldman, and we spent a lot of time there. So I don't know that I view that as a challenge the way somebody looking, at me and how I worked might say, well, that was, not how I'd want to live my life. Like, I think it's okay, especially in those earlier years, to spend a lot of time working. I liked being the first person who'd get into the desk. It took me longer, by the way, to like look at what was happening in the markets, read the things that I wanted to read, get up to speed and be able to start the day where I did. And I could do that. I didn't really have anything else that I had to worry about. Now, later on, when I had my kids, I was at Goldman when I had both kids. Fred, my son, he's 17 now. And then my daughter Eileen was born 2 years later in 2008, in the middle of the
Oh
financial
God.
crisis. I know.
Yeah.
I have a great photos of being in the delivery room with like the Financial Times on my belly. That my anyway, memorable moments.
Totally.
Um, but having young children, to be honest, maternity leave was really hard. Maternity leave was hard. And I don't think women sometimes talk about that enough because you're so used to feeling like you're at the top of your game and you're, super competent. And then all of a sudden you're home and you have this baby and you have no idea what you're doing and you feel completely like incompetent.
Yeah.
And I remember the moment that, my husband, was showered and shaving. And I said, where are you going? So after Fred was born, and he said, it's been 2 weeks. I'm going back to work. And I was like, don't leave me. And so then things changed, right? Like coming back, I had maternity leave, but I knew that I wanted to go back to work. And actually it's funny. It used to drive Adam crazy when I was pregnant because people would always say to me, Samara, when I was pregnant with the first, are you going to go back to work after the baby's born? And I would say, yes, I am. What about you, Adam? Are you going to go back to work when our baby's born? And then Adam would say, dude, I get it. It's a sexist question, but do you have to do that every time? And I was like, yes, I do. So going back to work and having toddlers, like you have to figure that out. And I think in a way, it helped me that I was a little bit more senior. I was actually promoted to managing director, like while I was on maternity leave with my second daughter. And so I think that's when you just have to figure out what you need and talk about it. And talk about, what works for you. So if you want to, do something with your kid or you have to go to an appointment, I think for me, the game changer was learning to be transparent about it and making it a negotiation. Like, yes, I can have this done. When do you need it done by? If you need it done sooner, then I'm ready to do it. Let me suggest this path. But being a master at that, I think is important in a place as intense as Goldman. But I can tell you, you asked me at the beginning of this conversation how my parents would describe me. And I can tell you, whether I was at Goldman or whether I was in theater, wherever I was, they would have described me as intense. Like I thrive in intensity. So for me personally, it's less about dealing with the intensity of my environment and just making sure I am continuously assessing where do I want to be spending my time and making that happen.
Totally. I think when you said work-life balance, I almost think it should be called work-life priorities.
Yes, I was just saying the same thing. Or priorities balance or something.
Right, because it's like first of all, there is no such thing as an exact balance, right? I mean, we're constantly, rejiggering that. And like priorities change too. So like, why are we trying to put it in some box that's not even a real box? So I think we should have a new bumper sticker called work-life priorities.
Yeah, or even like
up.
Priorities balance, because I guess part of what gets me is not just, yes, there's no thing as balance, it's all about prioritization, but also there's something about this notion that work exists outside of life that doesn't land with me. My career, my work has been part of my life, a part of my life I enjoy, and I think that's fine. I don't think you need to view work as extracurricular to real life. And I think things like, I have a friend, Annie McKee, who wrote an incredible book called How to Be Happy at Work. And the subtitles is The Power of Purpose, Hope, and Friendships. But one of the things she says is your work friends are real And having those relationships with people you care about at work is important to being happy at work. So again, all under this notion of you don't, start living. Hopefully you don't start living only when you leave the office.
I agree. And, when you say that with, from COVID till now, with just this whole, what is work?
Yeah.
How do we work?
Yeah.
Days in, days out, creating culture is changed dramatically. Part of what I feel is the younger generation may be missing out on a really great experience. I guess we'll all figure it out still over the next 5 years, but, it's ever changing. So question, you're 16 years in a place. I've not heard many people go back to a place they were before. It's like I'm in real estate, right? Like when we buy a building, sometimes you have a chance to buy it back, and we did it once and it didn't work out so well, right? So we always say never go back to where you were if you don't have to. What drove you to actually make that change?
Yeah, a few things, but just so you know, I am not the only boomerang at BlackRock. So the BlackRock boomerang is an actual thing. It happens. But it was funny when I went back to BlackRock, a lot of my friends and family thought, oh, well, at least you'll be familiar with it. And you have to realize BlackRock had changed quite a bit between 97 when I left and 2015 when I came back. I'm employee number 134 at BlackRock. It was a small firm. I remember, how much we celebrated when we hit 100 billion in assets. And it was really a fixed income portfolio management firm.
Yeah.
And it became global. It became multi-asset, multi-strategy. And today we have 20,000 people. So actually in 2015, it did feel like a different firm. But the reason I came back was really about those post financial crisis years. So I mentioned my daughter Eileen was born in 2008, and I had spent most of my Goldman career in the derivatives market. And if you recall, in those post-crisis years, everybody was blaming the derivatives market for everything.
Yeah.
And I learned then this joke about the bar fight, which is, if you're in a bar fight, you don't hit the person who started the fight. You hit the person you always wanted to hit. That was true of derivatives in that time.
Yeah.
And that was very frustrating for me because I felt really proud of the work that I had done largely in the interest rate derivatives market over the course of my career. On the other hand, I did feel like, as much as I felt and feel strongly that derivatives did not cause the financial crisis, that markets could be a lot more resilient, accessible, and transparent. And at that point, I really started to develop a much sharper sense of my own professional purpose.
Yeah.
If I were going to stay in finance, what did I want that to be about? And I wanted it to be about bringing resiliency and access to markets. And so that really sent me on a slight pivot. Just even at Goldman, I ended up doing a lot of work at Goldman Sachs as market structure was changing quickly in those kind of post global financial crisis years. The G20 nations, met and made a bunch of agreements around OTC market reform. And I really became a kind of a spokesperson and thought leader at the firm and in the industry around how to progress those changes. And that led me actually to testifying to Congress in really about CFTC derivatives reform and the implications to U.S. competitiveness. And through that, I reconnected with Barbara Novick, who was a BlackRock founder. She had been a mentor of mine, when I was at BlackRock, and we just started talking about the future of markets. And I shared with her, and she had heard me speak a lot about how markets could really modernize and become more accessible to more people. And she said, Samara, there's somebody that I want you to meet here. His name's Mark Wiedman. He runs our ETF business. And I know that you love working at Goldman, but just, as a mentor and somebody who's known you for a long time, you guys will just enjoy having a conversation. So you should talk to each other. Now, this is 2014, John. So I'm Googling what is an ETF. Because in 2014, if you're a bond market person or a derivatives person, you have no idea what an ETF is. Now, in 2024, you can't have a credible conversation really about public markets or even crypto markets these days without knowing what an ETF is. But that kind of shows the progress of the past 10 years. And that actually was Mark's whole thesis. He believed that ETFs were part of the equation, kind of part of the technology disruption, so to speak, that would bring more people into the markets, help make a broader range of investment strategies accessible, and bring transparency to parts of the market, especially the bond market that hadn't had it before. And that vision really, really hooked me. So that's what brought me back.
But what's so cool, and I'm 70 episodes in now, so I actually can see trends. I can see in all different professions. It was always that person, that mentor, that gave that little push. It wasn't everyone thinks that you get to this place and it's this big plan, and it's always someone else giving us a nudge somehow and being open for it, right? I mean, I know you were thinking about I do want to make a change, but you could easily stayed there for another 5 years, been happy, got more successful, but you had this mentor that you trusted, which is why I think relationships in life are just so important and are so meaningful when we look back to see how they have guided us to where we actually end up. So I think that's amazing. And here you are there, and it's a different company, thousands and thousands of people now. You manage an exorbitant amount of money in number and volume. How do you approach leadership that works with so many people and so many things and so many moving parts daily? How do you approach that? What's your thoughts on culture? What brings it all together so you can actually sleep at night for real?
I am a student of leadership, truly. I think I've learned a lot over the last 10 years that I've been back at BlackRock. I expect to continue learning a lot over the next 10 years. Some of the principles that I think my leadership is rooted in go back to what we talked about in theater. And you asked the question, how do you lead a lot of people? How do you lead at scale? The number one answer to that is you make sure the right people are in the right jobs. And I spend a lot of my time doing that. The theater saying for that is casting is 95% of directing. And I think casting is 95% of leadership anywhere, putting the right people in the right job and the right leaders in the right job. So at BlackRock, we talk often about what makes an effective people manager. That's not necessarily the same thing as another quality we talk about, which is a leader who grows leaders. So I aspire to be a leader who grows leaders. And in order to lead at scale, that's the only way to do it, is to put other leaders in high impact seats where they can do their very best work. So that's principle number one. Principle number two for me also relates to theater as a director. And that's the importance, and you mentioned this a little earlier, the dynamics of an ensemble cast and how people need to feel a lot of trust in their leadership group to do their best work. Because what you really want from a high performing leadership team, especially one that you are charging with innovation and, elevating standards and helping people go into parts of the market where they haven't been before, you're asking people to take risk. You want them to do it in the most thoughtful way possible. And you want them to feel supported when they do it. And I think putting people in situations where they feel like they can do their best work and they're going to have cover from their peers and from their manager if they make a mistake, those are the same principles around creating ensemble casts. And one of the things I've learned, particularly over the past 5 years, I'd say, is that just as much as a person can learn a lot about improving their people management or their leadership, there's a lot of intentionality you can bring to teams at work in terms of how they show up in a room together. And we've had some outside, leaders and coaches come in to talk to us about that sort of intentionality in putting together teams. And that's been really helpful in terms of being able to do this at scale.
Yeah, it's I think you just answered the question perfectly, because it's like any good team, it's the casting, right? Yeah. It's the directing. It's I love how you associate that with it. And I think, it doesn't get any easier as you get more people, right? So another question, which is, I'm going to veer off a little here. So, you've been recognized as Barron's most influential women in U.S. in 22, I think, in finance. I have 2 daughters. So what advice would you give young women aspiring to reach leadership roles in finance, right? That are up and coming, and it's changing, right? We got AI, we got all sorts of technology changes happening. What advice would you give?
Well, the advice my mother gave to me, which is find the thing that you're passionate about, which of course, like my daughter probably doesn't really know, and your daughters probably don't know either. So it means like really dive into the things that interest you, uncover those passions. Like those are the things that are going to make you want to work the hardest. And then the next thing that I think is so important is, especially if that thing turns out to be, in my case, finance or being on a trading floor where there's a lot of people who don't really look like you, knowing that can work to your advantage. Being the one that stands out, that you had a different background, I had a theater background. There's no question it differentiated me in the interview process. It differentiated me in how I showed up on the floor. It actually worked to my advantage, but it does and it did contribute to my always wondering. I remember, sometimes I wish I could go back in time to my first day of work, BlackRock self, and just give her a hug and say, you belong. Like, it wasn't a mistake that they gave you this job. Because secretly, like, I did kind of think it was a mistake, and maybe they thought it was going to be interesting. Let's see how the theater major actually does here. But, they were really going to be laughing at me. I was so nervous. And even when I was an associate at Goldman Sachs at the beginning on the trading floor, I was so nervous. I usually couldn't even eat the first half of the day. I was really scared, I don't even know what, looking back on it, but just because I felt I didn't really belong. And so that's the thing I would try. Like, if you are interested and excited about what you're doing, you belong at that table. And I think those are the 2 things, like kind of pursuing the interests and then just like underwriting that that's what you should be doing. Those were really important things for me.
I think what you just said should be a clip that every college graduate should listen to before they go and try to get their internship or their first job. Because I say the same thing. It's like, we all want you to succeed. Like, we're looking for you. You belong. And you got to feel that, right? And like you got through that feeling of not feeling it to forcing yourself to feel it. And not everybody, will have that courage. But hearing it from you, I hope gives people a lot more courage. So I think it's tremendous. All right, so let's talk a little ETFs. The word and the thing you had to look up in 2014, and it's crazy how dominant this has become. With all the new technology and even like Bitcoin and what's going on with this new ETF, give me your view into what's happening. Where you see this all going. It probably is in its infancy at this point, in my mind. It makes it so much more transparent and easy to understand. Even with Bitcoin, like, I didn't want to deal with the wallet. Right? I mean, I'm going back to it. It's just, I don't have the time to think about it or worry about it. So what's your thoughts on the ETF business in whole, and wherever you'd like to dive into?
So look, ETFs, which stand for exchange traded funds, are a market access technology that has, over the course of really, it's a 30-year history in the United States that we have had ETFs. And generally, that's how long ETFs have been around. They have disrupted all types of markets and asset classes to help more investors participate in them. And so, and actually, an important precursor to ETFs, which is about 35 years old, are index funds. So let's just talk for a second first about what index funds are, because importantly, when I call ETFs a disruptive technology, so was indexing. And it's interesting that indexing in the portfolio management context, meaning managing index funds, wasn't even possible until the first commercial microchips were introduced, because you needed so much compute power to actually take an index, which is really just a financial calculation, and turn it into a investable portfolio of stocks.
Yep.
And now we do millions and millions of calculations to enable the management of index portfolios that we do. So that was stage one. ETFs basically create a way to access an entire portfolio of stocks through one purchase of one stock on an exchange. An ETF is an exchange-traded stock that gives you access to an entire portfolio of stocks or of bonds. Now, fixed income ETFs that wrap bond portfolios have been around for around 22 years. And in the United States, to your point, Bitcoin ETFs have now been trading for about 6 months. So it's a continuous trajectory of providing access to more parts of the market in a way that anybody can do it. Anybody can buy it. And what was so important about indexation that's also important about ETFs, and this is kind of the foundational concept, you just didn't need that much money to get portfolio diversification. You can buy one share of an ETF and get access to a diversified portfolio of thousands of stocks or bonds. And 30 years ago, that sort of diversification, you needed to be a much more sophisticated investor with a lot more money to manage. So the thing that's exciting about ETFs is it lets individuals save for retirement, save for their kids' college education, save for buying a house, whatever the financial outcomes that they want. That was a lot harder to invest for in the absence of indexation and ETFs if you had less money.
With so many though coming up, like how at the beginning of something, you sort of can see a clear path of how to understand it, but then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. How do you see as a customer seeing through all that? I mean, every day it seems like there's a new one. It's a whole new concept, or a concept here, concept there. What's your advice on that for people to sort of see through the noise?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question. And right now that question is much bigger than ETFs. Like, the good news for the individual consumer or investor is that more information is available to you than ever before in history. And the bad news is, like, more information is available than ever before, and it can be really hard to aggregate and consume and make sense of that information. So it's interesting. I'm participating in a conversation tomorrow on the implications of AI to markets, but really what they're getting at is Gen AI and the implications of generative AI to markets. And I'm an AI optimist. I mean, there's absolutely best practices and guardrails, but what AI can bring to individual investors in terms of consuming, aggregating, and organizing all of that information to understand what they need to is really positive. But I think that aggregation of information and the use of the information that's available to us is probably the next most important thing to happen in markets. Now that we actually have, I mentioned that what's been so important over the past 20 years has been the evolution of transparency and putting the data out there for people. ETFs are just another form of market data. Now the challenge is using it.
So I have a question. With AI and with the abilities we're already seeing, and there's going to be many use cases applied to it. I think we're very, very, very early. We don't realize what it actually will completely be yet. But when I was first in real estate and I wanted to start my own brokerage company, there was a technology that enabled me to have market data, to not have to be like the Cushman Wakefield, the Jones Lang LaSalle that had millions and millions of dollars for research. Like, it democratized it, so just me, John Schultz, with this software could have all the market data I needed and almost have, it wasn't AI then, it was just a software system. Do you see like almost AI disrupting companies in a way where like I may have my research department being AI and not needing all these other services that are provided today in the finance world?
Look, there's no question that AI democratizes access to information. I think the question is, so what? Like, what are you doing with the information? What do you need the information for? And who like, what are the services that can be provided in an AI enabled world? So I think the question is like, where do you, John, want to spend your time? And where would you prefer to kind of, consume and trust the research of other people? Now, when we use Gen AI internally at BlackRock, a big difference to how we use it that's different than when I use ChatGPT is if I ask, we have something we call, we use a Copilot internally. Yeah. If I ask Copilot a question and it gives me a bunch of answers, it attributes each of them. And I think that's really important. Like when I ask ChatGPT, there's no attribution. And so I don't really have a way to check my source material. Yeah. I think, as you said, it's early and there's a whole trajectory. But I think the ability for people to do their own research in a much more effective way and get to much kind of quicker outcomes, that's pretty exciting. Like you can, if I think about, I told you when I got that first call about, meeting Mark Wiedman and I had to Google what is an ETF. I could have prepared myself for those first conversations with much more ease had I had the tools then that I do today.
I think it's gonna enable people to be able to start companies they could never start before with less money and more, I think, ability. But we'll see. It's early, but I think it's very exciting. It's also, scary at the same time because you just don't know where it all goes and what, I know a lot of people, they ask me like, what do I need to know that's going to not help me with my job today to for my future job? And I just hope there's more training and information on how people can feel how they can get involved, just like you're doing with ETFs. So
yeah, no, I think you're spot on. That's why, I hope for my kids, and I've thought about this, my son is going to college next year. How are they using AI in the classroom so the kids can get used to using it? I think our head of engineering says something that I find so helpful just in terms of first principles and what Gen AI does. And what it is that the only programming language you will need is English. Because what Gen AI does is changes how we interact with code and with computers, and we can do it using English. We can communicate to the computer in English, and we can hear back in English. And so you don't need to learn code. And so, for my kids, how are they learning how to do that so that they can use the tools in their lives? I think the education piece is spot on.
I love it. Well, we're going to see. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I love when things change. I feel when things change, just like you went through in 2014, it creates this new equal playing field for way more people to get involved if they want to, right? And build things that become larger than you could ever imagine, which you're sitting in the middle of right now. I just want to say how much I appreciate you coming on and spending this time. People are going to love this. And thank you very much.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me. And I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Hi, John Schultz here. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Would really appreciate it if you would like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. Looking forward to being with you soon.